Folks, it's a pleasure to continue our conversation from last week with Karen Justice-Guard. She's the CEO of Safe Havens. That's a group based out there in Concord and also a partner in Approved Realty and Mortgages. Welcome back.
Hi.
In last week's segment, she was talking about the slippery slope that she fell down after her parents' divorce, dropping out in the 10th grade, getting in with what I would say, Karen, was a rather loose and fast crowd of drugs, celebrities, and rock and roll, to put it loosely. And then certainly at an abusive relationship which wound up, as I understand it, with you leaving under the protection of the Mexican mafia. Is that right?
Right.
So, taking us from that point, where did your life go?
Well, the funny thing is that I was still young and had no solution, didn't understand what addiction was,
Okay.
and went to Miami, of all places, because my mom had moved there,
Okay.
and ended up, I'll give you a scenario.
Yeah.
I was floating in the ocean in Miami, and this girl just comes up to me. We start talking. The next thing, I'm in a penthouse, and now it's the Italian mafia. And I thought, oh my God, this is God's will for me. They just find me. But the truth of the matter is that I was ignorant. I didn't know about addiction, and that's all I knew was how to party.
Okay.
And I ended up for about 6 months living this wild life again. And that's just what it was. And I ended up coming back to the Bay Area. And then and there's a lot of stories in the book. I'm not going to get into every single story. But I went through a lot of men because that's what I thought love was. That I was going to find the right man to fix me because I had no skills to fix myself. And so it just was a long journey of alcohol and drugs and trying to find me. And I ended up in the worst, horrific domestic violence of my life afterwards.
This is sort of alluded to and described in graphic detail in the book. It's called Keep Showing Up, Living and Healing Beyond Welfare and Abuse. Tell us about it.
Well, like I said, is that you only do what you know.
Okay.
And the people that I was around were just big, tight people, lots of drugs, and I was young. And I wasn't skilled, and I didn't have an education. Yeah. So I just thought if I was a really, really good girlfriend, that my life would change.
Okay.
And what I didn't understand was what addiction does to people. So this man that I was with, when he wasn't on the drugs, was a great guy. But he'd get so paranoid because he'd eat the cocaine, and he was running the streets and doing all this stuff and very high level. And he would be so paranoid. Well, guess who got the run in? So through the whole thing, and you can get the book and read about all that, but I went off a 30-foot cliff one time. He beat me one time for 4 hours. I had no face. And it just got horrific worse, and I had to flee to Hawaii. You know, I was always fleeing,
Yeah.
you know, thinking that if I just changed my community and atmosphere, that my life would change, but I didn't realize that you take yourself everywhere you go.
Exactly.
And I needed to internally fix me, and I still didn't know about the 12 steps and about addiction.
And then Karen, if I could fast forward just a little bit, you got out of that relationship and started the 12-step process, met another person, and wound up with a restaurant, a home on the golf course, but still the same problems.
Well, there was one person before I met my husband.
Okay.
And that's the one that really changed my life.
Okay.
And he was a very, very successful man. He believed in me. He saw in me the woman that I am today that I never saw.
Okay.
And he was a multimillionaire, very successful, and in lots of communities and around the world, what he did in the big realm of life.
Okay.
He ended up throwing me into rehab. And in 1986, I went down to Southern California and got the beginnings of the 12-step process and finding out who Karen really was. They used to call me Lulu, and I was a Lulu, you know. And when I got into recovery and he filled my rooms from one side of the recovery room to the other in my detoxing for 11 days, they had to say, stop sending her the flowers, take away the diamonds. He took me around the world and just treated me in a way that I had never been treated,
Mm-hmm.
and just wanted the best for me. And I felt like he was trying to buy me and buy my friends and family. And, you know, I was lost. I had no clue about who I was. So I ended up marrying someone that was younger than me. I've always dated men 10, 15 years older than me.
Okay.
And so when I got into recovery, it was like, I knew I wouldn't stay sober. Not that he did drugs or anything,
Mm-hmm.
but he enabled me a lot because he loved me so much. And that was kind of a sickness too.
Yeah.
So I knew with these new steps that I had and these inventories I was taking, it was starting to peel all these layers of defiant and ignorance and self-indulgence and self-esteem and people-pleasing and all this stuff. But it was just the beginning layers. But I had enough intuitiveness, and I believe which is God's consciousness, to know that I would probably never stay sober and I would just manipulate. So I found this guy that I thought he had his own game.
Uh-huh.
And he was young and good looking, and
Uh-huh.
and he was a nobody. And I thought, wow, we could start a life together.
Good.
And we did. And 7 years later, after 2 children, and him losing his big job at UPS in management,
Mm-hmm.
I had to flee again, and I went to Tahoe and got back in the 12 steps and turned my life around.
But in that relationship, you had, if I could say sort of loosely, the American dream of a home
Oh,
on
absolutely.
a golf course.
Yeah.
You had a successful restaurant, and it was in Rossmore, the
No,
retirement community,
no,
or
that
where?
was what Safe Haven. It
Okay.
was in Martinez.
Oh, it was in Martinez.
Yeah.
Okay. And,
And
very
it was-
successful restaurant.
It was successful, but what I really want to stress is until you take a look of who you really are
Mm-hmm.
and what your defects of characters are,
Mm-hmm.
even though you put down drugs and alcohol, those will pop its head up at all parts of your life.
Exactly.
And I could never keep anything successful because I ended up living life without just drive
Mhm.
and not really changing who I was to get different results. And so I ended up just creating the same monster that life was too difficult to live sober, and I had to just numb out a little bit. And that's what happened, is that through whatever circumstance was, I kept looking at him as when he lost his job and he lost his self,
Mhm.
and I had this restaurant and we had these 2 kids, and I'm trying to keep together and keep sober and get up at 4 in the morning, and these little 4 and 5-year-olds, and he's having affairs and he's lost and he's cheating and all this. I looked at it as, again, I was a people pleaser, I was self-victimized, my expectations failed me.
Mm.
It started the self-pity, self-demoralization, and life just became too hard to live that I needed to numb out. And I put a needle in my arm after 8 years of sobriety. That was my solution. And this is how God works. The phone rang, and this is where my family wasn't talking to me,
Uh-huh.
and the only person was my twin sister's husband, and she had left him to it. And I was in a bad with the drugs and alcohol, and ended up doing what drugs do. It takes your integrity and everything away from you. And I ended up, we had sex, and the phone rang. And I remember in my restaurant, in the jury box, and I remember running to the phone, coming to, because I was in this oblivion state of mind of addiction. And all I heard was the lady that was watching my children say, if you don't want your son to be a child molester, you better get home. Within 3 days, I had gutted my restaurant, and my brother-in-law and I and the children went up to Tahoe. Never was with him again,
Mhm.
but that was a turning point.
Is it possible to overcome addiction?
On a daily basis, it is, but it's a spiritual-based program, and if you're not connected spiritually, you will end up filling that void with drugs and alcohol again.
Folks, again, a message of hope, rehabilitation, and success. Next week, we'll talk about safe havens and how Karen's turned her life around and is making a difference in other people's lives.